The air inside the Interstellar Academy's weapons presentation hall was electric, thick with the scent of ozone and ambition. The humming vibration of charged fields, gravity stabilizers, and focused energy beams throbbed faintly through the floor panels. Some students wore ceremonial armor plated with gleaming alloys from their homeworlds. Others floated, slithered, or stood on limbs that glistened with integrated weaponry. The stage at the front was flanked by kinetic barriers just in case a demonstration got too spirited. Every year, this day was infamous. Weapons Day, a cross-cultural display of power and pride. Students from over 100 different systems stood ready to show off their species' deadliest inventions. For many, it was a rite of passage. For others, a political performance. But for everyone, it was serious. Instructor Kelroth towered above the class on a levitating platform, his orange scales pulsing gently with the rhythm of his breath. A seasoned tactician of the Zentari warfronts, he had scars like tectonic plates shifting across his broad face. "Today," he growled, "you will not simply show your weapons. You will explain them. You will teach us what they say about your people." A hush fell as the first student stepped forward. Jurak, from the War Moon of Resk 4. His weapon unfolded with an audible thunk, a four-pronged plasma glaive, taller than most of the students, and glowing blue hot at the tips. He spun it twice, cutting arcs of fire through the air, before embedding it into the display slab. Applause followed, mostly respectful, some envious. Next came Veer, a six-eyed tactician from the aquatic moon of Harrel 9. She activated her gravity hammer with a chirp of her gills, the weapon collapsing and reforming with impossible grace. It bent the floor plating slightly when she set it down. Then came Naxari from the Skeldhive, her serrated disruptor purring ominously with a rotating core of antimatter. The hall dimmed around it, the hum of the weapon interfering with several student translators. The parade of ferocity continued. Crystalline shatter blades, sonic fragmentation fields, sentient ammo clusters every weapon. Bigger, brighter, more theatrical than the last. And then the door at the rear of the hall hissed open. Daniel walked in. He wasn't late, he had just been waiting. Unlike the others, who prepared with ceremonial preambles and heraldic flourishes, Daniel had been sitting quietly at the back, watching. He wore the standard academy jumpsuit, no armor, no visible tech, just a plain charcoal gray suit with one item in his front pocket, a slender silver pen. Some students turned to look. One of the Threnna giggled. Another student, the massive Klovek warrior named Brault, barked something in his native tongue that translated roughly to, "Is that his weapon or his homework?" Daniel didn't react. He simply walked to the center of the stage, calm but not cocky. The levitating platform lowered. Instructor Kelroth peered down at him, head tilting, uncertain. "Daniel," he rumbled, "do you understand the assignment?" "I do," Daniel said. "And where is your weapon?" Daniel reached up and unclipped the pen from his pocket. It clicked softly in his hand. Half the hall broke into laughter. Not polite laughter, full-throated, incredulous, dismissive. Even the less expressive species conveyed their amusement in posture, blinking patterns, or warbling throat pulses. Brault leaned back, arms crossed, smug. Kelroth frowned. "This is no time for cultural jokes, Earthborn. If you have brought nothing, say so. You may present last during our remediation week." Daniel held the pen up. "It's not a joke. This belonged to my grandfather. He was a spy during Earth's Cold War." Kelroth blinked. "A spy?" "Yes. On Earth, before we reached the stars, espionage was a different kind of warfare. He wasn't armed with rifles or bombs. He carried this." Daniel glanced at it, a fondness passing through his eyes. "But don't mistake this for sentiment. This pen is a weapon, a very real one." Some students shifted uneasily. Veer, curious, floated a little closer. "How can such a small object be lethal?" Daniel stepped forward. "Let me show you." He moved to the demonstration bench. A slab of hardened alloy standard issue for weapon testing lay bolted into the display rack. He held up the pen, clicked it once. The diamond-tipped end emerged with a mechanical snap. Clean, silent. "This tip," he said, "is a lab-grown diamond, used for cutting glass, industrial etching, and once, to disable aircraft windshields. He dragged the tip across the alloy in one deliberate stroke. A hissing sound followed, and when he stepped aside, a narrow but shockingly deep groove remained in the metal so sharp the edges sparkled. Whispers started. Brault sat forward. Veer tilted her head, fascinated. "Next," Daniel said. He twisted the barrel. A thin razor snapped out from the side, less than 2 inches long, curved slightly, sharp as a whisper. This was hidden in the pen's body, used for slicing through restraints, clothing, even ballistic fabric. He picked up a piece of reinforced combat textile, a spare sleeve from the Academy's standard-issue armor. He held it up with one hand, swiped the pen with the other. The fabric split like fruit, falling in 2 halves to the floor. The room had fallen silent. Third function. He clicked a small latch at the pen's base. A soft hiss followed. A pressurized burst of invisible gas shot forward, slamming into a practice drone 10 meters away. The drone wobbled in the air, tilted, then drifted left, its stabilizers compensating too late. "That's compressed CO2, Daniel said, used as a distractor or to blind sensors temporarily. Kelroth's jaw clenched. His orange scales had paled slightly. Daniel stepped up to the drone and leaned in. Last function. He pressed the top of the pen, and a micro-shock emitter flared to life at the side, no louder than a wasp's buzz. The tip touched the drone's casing. A blue spark jumped. The drone spasmed, flickered, and fell to the ground with a mechanical whimper, circuits shorted. Daniel exhaled quietly and turned back to the class. "This," he said, holding the pen upright, "was what my grandfather carried. Every day, through borders, embassies, enemy lines. He wasn't the strongest, he wasn't the fastest, but he was always underestimated. That's why he survived." No one laughed now. Veer spoke, her voice soft. "Your people hide weapons?" "Sometimes," Daniel replied, "but mostly we hide the intention behind them." Kelroth stepped down from his platform. His eyes studied the pen as though it were radioactive. "You understand the implications of what you've shown, yes?" Daniel nodded. "I do." "Then state your philosophy. Complete the assignment." Daniel looked at the gathered species, some still stunned, others staring at the pen like it might bite. He placed it back in his pocket. "A weapon that doesn't look like one will always be the last thing your enemy expects." For several seconds, no one spoke. Then, quietly, Kelroth said, "Thank you. Class dismissed." Even as the students filtered out, murmuring in hushed tones, Mose gave Daniel a wide berth. Brault didn't look at him again. Veer, thoughtful, lingered at the edge of the hall. Daniel walked alone, shoulders relaxed but not triumphant. He wasn't gloating, he was remembering. The pen was heavier now, not with metal, but with meaning. The next morning, at the Interstellar Academy, was quiet, too quiet, for a facility housing over 2,000 cadets from 23 different planets. Normally, the mornings buzzed with conversation, sparring echoes, and the hissing churn of atmospheric recalibrators dealing with incompatible respiratory chemistries. But today, as Daniel walked into the main mess hall, the only thing that greeted him was silence. It wasn't overt avoidance, just space. Subtle gaps in seating arrangements, conversations that paused as he passed. Even species without traditional ears seemed to register his presence with newfound caution. Daniel took his usual spot at the edge of a communal table. It had once been a lively corner shared with Veer, a Harl IX tactician who swam through 3-dimensional strategy like it was ocean current, and Tonic, a Krylloid engineer who liked melting steel just to smell it bubble. Now they sat 2 meters away, speaking softly in translation-filtered murmurs. Daniel didn't confront it. He knew this pattern. He peeled open the top of his nutrient pack, some Terran Mars hybrid breakfast gel that tried and failed to simulate scrambled eggs, and started eating. Fork in one hand, pen in the other, clicking it absent-mindedly. 3 clicks in, he realized the room had gone silent again. He looked up. Every pair of eyes, compound or otherwise, was locked on the pen. With a slow breath, Daniel tucked it into his shirt pocket. From across the table, Veer finally spoke. "Do all humans carry hidden weapons?" Daniel wiped his mouth and shook his head. No. Most carry phones. Tonic interjected, his voice processed into a gravelly growl. But you could modify a phone to act like your pen, couldn't you? Daniel hesitated. That's not the point. The pen wasn't designed as a weapon, not initially. My grandfather made it that way because it was common. That's what kept him alive. But you're not in a war zone, Vire said. Why bring it here? Daniel looked her in the eye. Because you don't wait until you're in a war zone to realize you need to survive. She didn't respond. He finished eating in silence and stood to leave. As he passed the waste recycler, a voice called out behind him. Daniel? It was Instructor Kelroth. The old soldier stood by the exit, arms crossed over his wide chest. He motioned for Daniel to follow. They walked in silence through the Academy's eastern wing, past hangar bays and tactical simulators, until they reached a small training annex, a place typically reserved for individual combat exercises. Today, it was empty. Kelroth keyed in a code, the doors sealed behind them with a heavy clang. Why did you really bring that pen? The instructor asked, without turning. Daniel blinked. I already explained that. No, Kelroth said, finally facing him. You gave a good story, a complete story, but I've trained over 9,000 cadets in my time, and I know when someone's holding back. Daniel hesitated, then nodded slowly. My grandfather didn't just survive with that pen, he saved lives with it. Once, he took out a security team twice his size, disabled a convoy, and rescued 3 scientists being smuggled across the Baltic, all with that pen. That kind of legacy doesn't belong in a drawer. Kelroth stared at him. You admire him. I try to live up to him. The instructor moved closer, his voice lowering. You've made some of the most dangerous minds on this campus feel vulnerable. That isn't easily undone. Daniel frowned. It was a presentation, which ended with fear. Do you understand what that means? He did. He'd seen it before. On Earth, growing up in military enclaves, surrounded by suspicion disguised as curiosity. Once people learned what you were capable of, they stopped seeing you as you. Kelroth continued. You'll be watched now, not because you did something wrong, but because you could, and that's enough to make you dangerous in the eyes of those who don't understand your intentions. Daniel was silent. Your assignment was valid, Kelroth said, but I advise caution. The pen stays in your quarters unless asked for. Understood? Daniel nodded. Understood. They exited the annex, but the sense of isolation didn't lift. It followed Daniel through his afternoon courses, interstellar law, xenopsychology, exobiology. No one sat near him. Even the AI tutors adjusted their vocal warmth parameters subtly downward, mimicking the unspoken chill in the air. That evening, as he entered the common lounge, he found Brault, the Klovek warrior, waiting by the entrance. Daniel slowed. The Klovek stood tall, 8 feet of muscle and chitin armor, his eyes glowing faintly under his frontal ridge. For a moment, Daniel prepared himself to deflect a punch. But Brault didn't attack. You are quiet, Brault said finally. So, are you? Brault grunted. Our warriors hide nothing. Our strength is shown. Daniel shrugged. Humans show strength differently. Brault nodded, slowly. You did not lie. That is respected. But you must understand. Our kind fears hidden blades. Daniel considered that. I understand. Brault stepped aside. Then, you are still welcome among us. But tread carefully, Pen Warrior. The nickname stuck. By morning, half the Academy was using it first as a joke, then as a warning, then simply as a label. Pen Warrior appeared in training rosters, cafeteria seat rotations, and private messages he wasn't supposed to see. A week passed. Then another. Daniel adapted, as humans did. He trained alone, studied harder, spoke when needed, and slowly the fear dulled. Not vanished, but dulled, replaced by something more complex. Respect mixed with distance. It was during the second round of tactical simulations when the Academy's trust was truly tested. The alert came in the middle of class. An off-world transport shuttle had lost control over Scalar Canyon, plummeting into the ravine with 5 cadets on board. The region was unmonitored, signal compromised, and filled with volatile magnetic rock formations. The first rescue team was prepped immediately, 10 cadets, including Daniel. As they suited up in the launch bay, Instructor Kelroth paced the line. "This is a live emergency. No simulations, real injuries, real risk. Your job is extraction. Any threats are secondary." Vire stood near Daniel this time, her face unreadable. The dropship rattled as it descended through the canyon's winds. Dust and static filled the viewports. When they landed, the wreckage came into view, half buried in rock and metal, flames licking at the hull. They split into teams. Daniel moved fast, crawling into the twisted structure with only a basic medkit and torchlight. Inside, he found one of the cadets, a young Solari pinned under a collapsed beam, her breathing ragged. He tried lifting it. Too heavy. He scanned the area, looking for leverage. Nothing. Then he remembered. He pulled the pen from his chest pocket, twisted the barrel, activated the razor. He found the tangled restraint straps digging into the cadet's torso, cutting off circulation. He sliced them clean. Then, clicking again, he extended the diamond tip and carved out a wedge in the support beam, just enough to shift the weight without collapsing the structure. Another cadet arrived moments later. Together, they hauled her out. Later, when the medical transport arrived, the Solari whispered something to Daniel. "Pen Warrior, saved me." The instructors heard. So did the rest of the squad. By the time they returned to the academy, the tone had shifted again, still wary, but layered now with gratitude, confusion, and something else. Curiosity. No one had ever saved a life with a pen before. And that terrified them even more. 2 weeks passed, and though the halls of the Interstellar Academy still echoed with whispers, the edge had dulled. Pen Warrior had become less of a warning and more of a legend. A dozen alien forums quietly circulated grainy security footage from the canyon rescue. Daniel sliding through fire, choked wreckage, crouched low, torchlight flaring as he pulled the Solari cadet free, with nothing but a tool too mundane for scanners. The footage had no sound, but one detail stood out in every frame. The pen never left his grip. For the instructors, this presented a dilemma. No rules had technically been broken, but the philosophical weight of it lingered. A student had, without authorization, used a concealed weapon in a crisis. He had also saved a life in a scenario where authorized tools had failed. Kelroth convened a closed meeting with the Academy Council. No conclusion was reached that day, but one question emerged again and again. What else are the humans not showing us? Meanwhile, in classroom B47, Daniel sat through tactical application and response analysis, a dry simulation-heavy course where cadets reviewed real engagements from the past 30 galactic years. Normally, it was a passive class, but today, Kelroth walked in carrying a blank data slate. "Change of format," he announced. "We're analyzing your species." Murmurs rippled. A few glances were cast toward Daniel. Kelroth brought up a recording grainy black and white footage of a Terran infantry unit defending a frozen outpost. Primitive by galactic standards, no force fields, no rail cannons. Just stubborn terrain and layered uniforms. Earth, pre-unification era. The Altai campaign. On screen, the unit took cover in snowbanks, exchanging fire with a larger, better-equipped force. "They are outnumbered and underarmed," Kelroth said, "but they win. Why?" Tonic offered first. Better terrain analysis? No, they hadn't mapped the region. Vire tilted her head. Improvised tactics? Partially, Kelroth admitted. But more than that, they exploited assumptions. He paused the footage. "Watch this." The playback resumed. One soldier, apparently wounded, dragged himself out of cover drawing fire. When the attackers emerged to flank him, a buried mine triggered. The wounded soldier wasn't wounded at all. Just bait. Kelroth looked around the room. That soldier had no advanced gear, no psychic foresight. He simply understood that the enemy assumed pain made him weak, so he weaponized the assumption. Now no one looked at Daniel. They stared at their own notes, or the floor. Kelroth turned to him. "Daniel, explain your grandfather's philosophy. What does it mean to win with a lie?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He didn't see it as lying. He saw it as not showing your cards until the last possible second, because in a fight, Power is predictable. Surprise wins. Kelroth nodded, almost reluctantly. A dangerous philosophy, but effective. That evening, the campus held its monthly team sparring challenge. It was optional, meant to encourage mixed-species cooperation and strategy. Daniel rarely joined. This time, he was signed up without his consent. When he arrived at the sim pit, his name was already displayed on the board. Team A: Veer, Brault, Tonek, Daniel. Team B: multiple species, equal numbers. No weapons allowed, just tactics and tools provided on the field. "Why did you sign me up?" Daniel asked Vire as he approached. She shrugged with all four shoulders. "They want to see if you're more than a story, so let's show them." The arena activated shifting walls, shifting lighting, uneven terrain. The challenge: breach the center tower and retrieve a beacon. As they moved, Daniel noticed the others instinctively looked to Brault for orders. The Klovek barked commands, took point, crashed through obstacles. But they didn't make progress. The opposing team laid traps, redirected lighting, blocked corridors with gravity fields. They stalled. Until Daniel pulled Vire aside. "Tell Brault to keep pushing, loud and direct. Tonek and I will loop left." She glanced at him. "You have a plan? Just trust me." She relayed the message. Brault didn't like it, but he obeyed. His charge triggered 3 defensive measures: blinding strobes, net drones, and static walls, which gave Daniel and Tonek just enough time to scale a narrow vent and drop into the tower from above. The beacon was guarded. 2 cadets stood watch, one of them from the Mirax faction bipedal, fast reacting, known for telegraphing aggression early. The other, a Valari, had thermal sight. Daniel whispered to Tonek, "I'm going to fake a heat signature burst. When they look left, we go right." Tonek raised a brow ridge. "You carry heat flares now?" Daniel grinned and tapped his chest. "Nope, just body temp manipulation. Been holding my breath." He counted to 3, exhaled with force, and darted behind a heat vent panel. The thermal shift pinged instantly. The Valari turned. Tonek surged forward, snatched the beacon, and they vanished up the side shaft as the arena sirens blared in their favor. They won in under 6 minutes. Later, as they walked off the field, Brault growled with mild frustration. "You misled me. Gave false strategy." Daniel shook his head. "No, I gave you the real strategy. You were the hammer. We were the needle." Brault tilted his head, considering. "You think like prey, but strike like predator. I think like someone who doesn't want to get hit at all." The next day, a new elective was quietly added to the Academy's offerings. Unconventional strategy and psychological warfare. Cross-species module. Only 5 students enrolled in the first hour. By end of week, 78 had signed up. Daniel was asked to co-lead a session with Kelroth, not as an instructor, as a case study. The lesson focused on misdirection, hidden potential, and the psychology of perception. At the end, Vire raised a question. If human tactics rely on surprise, doesn't that stop working once everyone expects it? Daniel thought for a long time, then smiled. For the first time in weeks. Only if we stop changing what the surprise is. The room fell into a hush again, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was understanding. And in a school built on power, that was more dangerous than any weapon in the room. The Interstellar Academy's annual field integration exercise was never publicly announced. That was the point. The only warning cadets received was when their meal plans were suspended and their personal quarters sealed under lockdown protocol. No gear, no prior notice, just deployment. When the sirens blared that morning, most cadets leapt out of bed, ready to improvise. For Daniel, it was routine by now. He laced his boots, grabbed his issued coat, and hesitated just once, his fingers brushing the pen lying quietly on his desk. He left it there. Not because he didn't trust it. Because he wanted to prove something. An unarmed human could still be dangerous. Their mission was outlined mid-flight, delivered by an instructor with a tone too casual for the stakes. Your objective is to infiltrate and secure a mock listening post. You will encounter static defenses, simulated hostiles, and environmental hazards. Capture and hold the objective for 6 hours. No external support, no resupply. Brault, seated across from Daniel, cracked his neck with an audible pop. 6 hours is too long, he muttered. Veer, suspended in her gravity sling, adjusted her breathing mask. Only if you're on the wrong side of the trap. Daniel said nothing. The dropship touched down in a rocky basin, atmosphere thin, temperature below freezing. High cliffs formed a narrow corridor leading to the outpost, an ugly cube of reinforced panels and shielded antenna arrays. They split into 3 groups. Daniel's team took the left ridge, climbing steadily despite the brittle wind. The simulated defenses kicked in 20 minutes in turret pulses, sound-canceling fields, thermal sensors. By the time they reached the ridge crest, one cadet had already been tagged out by a drone burst. The others crouched low behind a rock ledge. Daniel looked at the outpost below. Standard formation, 4 emplacements, 2 patrol units. Main door locked. Tanek grumbled. We breach loud, they collapse the ridge. We breach quiet, they triangulate position. Then we give them what they want, Daniel said. He stood, made sure he was visible, and tossed a reflective panel toward the patrol unit. The patrol drone pinged. Moments later, the entire left slope lit up with suppression fire. Not where Daniel was. Where they thought he'd be. Under cover of the assault, Veer's team launched a thermal mirage through the canyon wall, a pulse that made it appear the entire second squad was advancing. The defenders diverted. Brault crashed through the right flank, 2 cadets at his side, while Daniel and Tanek moved in from the rear. They breached the outpost in under 10 minutes. The interior was a warren of corridors, sensor jammers, and simulated biohazards. For the first time, Daniel realized the simulation had changed. These weren't normal training parameters, too many variables, too little margin. 2 hours in, they secured the command center. 3 hours in, the temperature dropped again. By hour 4, things turned real. Not simulated real, actual real. The outpost's heating system failed. They'd been told this was all virtual danger, no injuries, no environmental risk. But someone, either by design or by error, had activated the structure's real power system. The heating unit surged, then died, locking the emergency redundancies behind a dead system. The cold was no longer artificial. Within 40 minutes, Veer's core temp was down 5 degrees. Brault's chitin began to stiffen from internal condensation. Tanek, who thrived in molten environments, was barely able to move. They had 2 hours left to hold. Daniel stood by the control panel, blinking through condensation-fogged lenses. He tapped his communicator. No response. Jammed. He exhaled, watched the vapor curl around his face, and made a choice. He ran back to the ridge. Alone. By the time he reached the dropship wreckage used as a simulated landing zone, his fingers had begun to seize. He couldn't feel his feet. He dug through debris with clumsy hands, shoving aside scorched panels and training drones until he found it. The box marked Instructor Field Pack. Inside, a thermal cutter, 2 medical kits, and a locked equipment pouch. And there it was. His pen. He clipped it to his collar and returned to the outpost. The final stretch of the climb nearly took him. Ice had formed inside the outer walls, and one wrong step sent him crashing into the rock below. He slammed into the slope hard, ribs lighting up with pain sharp enough to make him gasp. He didn't scream. Didn't stop. He dragged himself to the ventilation intake, slumped beside the panel, and clicked the pen once. Diamond tip. Twist. Razor. Another click. Gas burst. He used the pressurized spray to blast the frost off the locking mechanism, then inserted the pen into the manual override port. The shock emitter flared, triggering a spark inside the frozen junction box. The heating system came back online. Warmth returned. Slowly. Daniel collapsed beside the vent, coughing hard. His side screamed. Every breath stabbed like a blade. It took 15 minutes before the others found him. Veer slid beside him, scanning his side. 2 ribs at least, she said. Breath's too shallow. I fell, Daniel said. Didn't bounce well. Tanek arrived with a stretcher. You should have waited, called for evac. Daniel shook his head. I had the pen. I had options. Veer didn't speak for a long time. Then quietly, You're not just dangerous, Daniel. You're committed. He nodded, slowly. One doesn't mean the other. The simulation ended at hour 6 on the dot. Medics arrived. Daniel was taken off field, ribs fractured, hypothermia setting in. Recovery took time. 3 days in medbay to stabilize vitals and pain management. 3 more before his breathing normalized. By the 7th day, he was back on his feet carefully. He didn't attend class that week, but notes flooded in. Not formal messages. Handwritten ones. Folded slips slid under his door. No names. Just words. Still thinking about the pen. Did you really disable a junction with just that? You made us all rethink how we train. On the 10th day, Kelroth visited him. No lecture this time. Just sat beside the bed. You changed the curriculum, the instructor said. Daniel looked up. Wasn't trying to. Kelroth nodded. All the same, the Academy is adding a new course next rotation. Disguised assets and tactical deception. You'll be listed as contributing material. Daniel blinked. What does that even mean? It means, Kelroth said, standing, that the pen stays. Daniel smiled. The instructor added, one condition. It remains a tool, not a crutch. You are not the pen, Daniel. You are what makes it dangerous. He left before Daniel could reply. 3 weeks later, Daniel returned to class. Some cadets nodded as he passed. A few still avoided his gaze. But most looked at the pen, and then looked away. Not out of fear, out of understanding. Because now they knew on a battlefield full of noise and thunder, it's not the loudest weapon you fear. It's the quiet one that never needed to shout. And sometimes, the deadliest thing in the room fits in a pocket.